Chapter 19 of Mr. Standfast by John Buchan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. The Cage of the Wild Birds. "Why, Mr. Ivery, come right in," said the voice at the table. There was a screen before me, stretching from the fireplace to keep off the draught from the door by which I had entered. It stood higher than my head, but there were cracks in it through which I could watch the room. I found a little table on which I could lean my back, for I was dropping with fatigue. Blenkiron sat at the writing table, and in front of him were little rows of patience cards. Wood ashes still smouldered in the stove, and a lamp stood at his right elbow which lit up the two figures. The bookshelves and the cabinets were in twilight. "I've been hoping to see you for quite a time." Blenkiron was busy arranging the little heaps of cards, and his face was wreathed in hospitable smiles. I remember wondering why he should play the host to the true master of the house. Ivery stood erect before him. He was a rather splendid figure now that he had sloughed off all disguises and was on the threshold of his triumph. Even through the fog in which my brain worked, it was forced upon me that here was a man born to play a big part. He had a jowl like a Roman king on a coin, and scornful eyes that were used to mastery. He was younger than me, confound him, and now he looked it. He kept his eyes on the speaker, while a little smile played round his mouth, a very ugly smile. "So," he said, "we have caught the old crow too. I had scarcely hoped for such good fortune, and to speak the truth I had not concerned myself much about you. But now we shall add you to the bag. And what a bag of vermin to lay out on the lawn!" He flung back his head and laughed. "Mr. Ivery," Blenkiron began, but was cut short. "Drop that name. All that is past, thank God. I am the Graf von Schwabing, an officer of the Imperial Guard. I am not the least of the weapons that Germany has used to break her enemies." "You don't say," drawled Blenkiron, still fiddling with his patience cards. The man's moment had come, and he was minded not to miss a jot of his triumph. His figure seemed to expand, his eye kindled, his voice rang with pride. It was melodrama of the best kind, and he fairly rolled it round his tongue. I don't think I grudged it him, for I was fingering something in my pocket. He had won all right, but he wouldn't enjoy his victory long, for soon I would shoot him. I had my eye on the very spot above his right ear where I meant to put my bullet. For I was very clear that to kill him was the only way to protect Mary. I feared the whole 70 millions of Germany less than this man. That was the single idea that remained firm against the immense fatigue that pressed down on me. "I have little time to waste on you," said he who had been called Ivery, "but I will spare a moment to tell you a few truths. Your childish game never had a chance. I played with you in England, and I have played with you ever since. You have never made a move, but I have quietly counted it. Why, man, you gave me your confidence. The American, Mr. Dunn." "What about Clarence?" asked Blenkiron. His face seemed to study in pure bewilderment. "I was that interesting journalist." "Now, to think of that!" said Blenkiron in a sad, gentle voice. "I thought I was safe with Clarence. Why, he brought me a letter from old Joe Hooper, and he knew all the boys down Emporia way." Ivery laughed. "You have never done me justice, I fear, but I think you will do it now. Your gang is helpless in my hands. General Hannay!" And I wish I could give you a notion of the scorn with which he pronounced the word general. "Yes, Dick?" said Blenkiron intently. "He has been my prisoner for 24 hours, and the pretty Miss Mary too. You are all going with me in a little to my own country. You will not guess how. We call it the Underground Railway, and you will have the privilege of studying its working. I had not troubled much about you, for I had no special dislike of you. You are only a blundering fool, what you call in your country easy fruit." "I thank you, Graf," Blenkiron said solemnly. "But since you are here, you will join the others. One last word. To beat inepts such as you is nothing. There is a far greater thing. My country has conquered. You and your friends will be dragged at the chariot wheels of a triumph such as Rome never saw. Does that penetrate your thick skull? Germany has won, and in 2 days the whole round earth will be stricken dumb by her greatness." As I watched Blenkiron, a grey shadow of hopelessness seemed to settle on his face. His big body drooped in his chair, his eyes fell, and his left hand shuffled limply among his patience cards. I could not get my mind to work, but I puzzled miserably over his amazing blunders. He had walked blindly into the pit his enemies had dug for him. Peter must have failed to get my message to him, and he knew nothing of last night's work or my mad journey to Italy. We had all bungled, the whole wretched bunch of us, Peter and Blenkiron and myself. I had a feeling at the back of my head that there was something in it all I couldn't understand, that the catastrophe could not be quite as simple as it seemed. But I had no power to think, with the insolent figure of Ivery dominating the room. Thank God I had a bullet waiting for him. That was the one fixed point in the chaos of my mind. For the first time in my life I was resolute on killing one particular man, and the purpose gave me a horrid comfort. Suddenly Ivery's voice rang out sharp. "Take your hand out of your pocket. You fool, you are covered from 3 points in the walls. A movement and my men will make a sieve of you. Others before you have sat in that chair, and I am used to take precautions. Quick, both hands on the table." There was no mistake about Blenkiron's defeat. He was done and out, and I was left with the only card. He leaned wearily on his arms, with his palms of his hands spread out. "I reckon you've got a strong hand, Graf," he said, and his voice was flat with despair. "I hold a royal flush," was the answer. And then suddenly came a change. Blenkiron raised his head, and his sleepy, ruminating eyes looked straight at Ivery. "I call you," he said. I didn't believe my ears, nor did Ivery. "The hour for bluff is past," he said. "Nevertheless, I call you." At that moment I felt someone squeeze through the door behind me and take his place at my side. The light was so dim that I saw only a short square figure, but a familiar voice whispered in my ear. "It's me, Andra Amos. Man, this is a great ploy. I'm here to see the end of it." No prisoner waiting on the finding of the jury, no commander expecting news of a great battle, ever hung in more desperate suspense than I did during the next seconds. I had forgotten my fatigue. My back no longer needed support. I kept my eyes glued to the crack in the screen, and my ears drank in greedily every syllable. Blenkiron was now sitting bolt upright with his chin in his hands. There was no shadow of melancholy in his lean face. "I say I call you, Herr Graf von Schwabing. I'm going to put you wise about some little things. You don't carry arms, so I needn't warn you against monkeying with a gun. You're right in saying that there are 3 places in these walls from which you can shoot. Well, for your information, I may tell you that there's guns in all 3, but they're covering you at this moment, so you'd better be good." Ivery sprang to attention like a ramrod. "Karl!" he cried. "Gustav!" As if by magic, figures stood on either side of him, like warders by a criminal. They were not the sleek German footmen whom I had seen at the chalet. One I did not recognize. The other was my servant, Geordie Hamilton. He gave them one glance, looked round like a hunted animal, and then steadied himself. The man had his own kind of courage. "I've gotten something to say to you," Blenkiron drawled. "It's been a tough fight, but I reckon the hot end of the poker is with you. I compliment you on Clarence Dunn. You fooled me fine over that business, and it was only by the mercy of God you didn't win out. You see, there was just the one of us who was liable to recognize you, whatever way you twisted your face, and that was Dick Hannay. I give you good marks for Clarence. For the rest, I had you beaten flat." He looked steadily at him. "You don't believe it? Well, I'll give you proof. I've been watching your underground railway for quite a time. I've had my men on the job, and I reckon most of the lines are now closed for repairs. All but the trunk line into France. That I'm keeping open, for soon there's going to be some traffic on it." At that I saw Ivery's eyelids quiver. For all his self-command, he was breaking. "I admit we cut it mighty fine, along of your fooling me about Clarence. But you struck a bad snag in General Hannay, Graf. Your heart-to-heart talk with him was poor business. You reckoned you had him safe, but that was too big a risk to take with a man like Dick unless you saw him cold before you left him. He got away from this place, and early this morning I knew all he knew. After that it was easy. I got the telegram you had sent this morning in the name of Clarence Dunn, and it made me laugh. Before midday I had this whole outfit under my hand. Your servants have gone by the Underground Railway to France. Ehrlich, well, I'm sorry about Ehrlich. I knew now the name of the Portuguese Jew. He wasn't a bad sort of man, Blenkiron said regretfully, and he was plumb honest. I couldn't get him to listen to reason, and he would play with firearms. So I had to shoot. Dead? Asked Ivery sharply. Yes. I don't miss, and it was him or me. He's under the ice now, where you wanted to send Dick Hannay. He wasn't your kind, Graf, and I guess he has some chance of getting into heaven. If I weren't a hard-shell Presbyterian, I'd say a prayer for his soul. I looked only at Ivery. His face had gone very pale, and his eyes were wandering. I am certain his brain was working at lightning speed, but he was a rat in a steel trap, and the springs held him. If ever I saw a man going through hell, it was now. His pasteboard castle had crumbled about his ears, and he was giddy with the fall of it. The man was made of pride, and every proud nerve of him was caught on the raw. So much for ordinary business, said Blenkiron. There's the matter of a certain lady. You haven't behaved over-nice about her, Graf, but I'm not going to blame you. You maybe heard a whistle blow when you were coming in here? No? Why, it sounded like Gabriel's trump. Peter must have put some lung power into it. Well, that was the signal that Miss Mary was safe in your car, but in our charge. Do you comprehend? He did. The ghost of a flush appeared in his cheeks. You ask about General Hannay? I'm not just exactly sure where Dick is at the moment, but I opine he's in Italy. I kicked aside the screen, thereby causing Amos almost to fall on his face. I'm back, I said, and pulled up an armchair and dropped into it. I think the sight of me was the last straw for Ivery. I was a wild enough figure, grey with weariness, soaked, dirty, with the clothes of the porter Joseph Zimmer in rags from the sharp rocks of the Schwarzsteintor. As his eyes caught mine they wavered, and I saw terror in them. He knew he was in the presence of a mortal enemy. "Why, Dick," said Blenkiron with a beaming face, "this is mighty opportune. How in creation did you get here?" "I walked," I said. I did not want to have to speak, for I was too tired. I wanted to watch Ivery's face. Blenkiron gathered up his patience cards, slipped them into a little leather case, and put it in his pocket. "I've one thing more to tell you. The wild birds have been summoned home, but they won't ever make it. We've gathered them in. Pavia and Hofgaard and Conradi. Ehrlich is dead. And you are going to join the rest in our cage." As I looked at my friend, his figure seemed to gain in presence. He sat square in his chair with a face like a hanging judge, and his eyes, sleepy no more, held Ivery as in a vice. He had dropped, too, his drawl and the idioms of his ordinary speech, and his voice came out hard and massive like the clash of granite blocks. "You're at the bar now, Graf von Schwabing. For years you've done your best against the decencies of life. You have deserved well of your country, I don't doubt it. But what has your country deserved of the world? One day soon Germany has to do some heavy paying, and you are the first installment. I appeal to the Swiss law. I stand on Swiss soil, and I demand that I be surrendered to the Swiss authorities." Ivery spoke with dry lips, and the sweat was on his brow. "Oh, no, no," said Blenkiron soothingly. "The Swiss are a nice people, and I would hate to add to the worries of a poor little neutral state. All along both sides have been outside the law in this game, and that's going to continue. We've abode by the rules, and so must you. For years you've murdered and kidnapped and seduced the weak and ignorant, but we're not going to judge your morals. We leave that to the Almighty when you get across Jordan. We're going to wash our hands of you as soon as we can. You'll travel to France by the Underground Railway, and there be handed over to the French government. For what I know, they've enough against you to shoot you every hour of the day for a 12-month. I think he had expected to be condemned by us there and then and sent to join Ehrlich beneath the ice. Anyhow, there came a flicker of hope into his eyes. I dare say he saw some way to dodge the French authorities if he once got a chance to use his miraculous wits. Anyhow, he bowed with something very much like self-possession and asked permission to smoke. As I have said, the man had his own courage. "Blenkiron," I cried, "we're going to do nothing of the kind." He inclined his head gravely toward me. "What's your notion, Dick?" "We've got to make the punishment fit the crime," I said. I was so tired that I had to form my sentences laboriously, as if I were speaking a half-understood foreign tongue. "Meaning?" "I mean that if you hand him over to the French, he'll either twist out of their hands somehow, or get decently shot, which is far too good for him. This man and his kind have sent millions of honest folk to their graves. He has sat spinning his web like a great spider, and for every thread there has been an ocean of blood spilled. It's his sort that made the war, not the brave, stupid, fighting Boche. It's his sort that's responsible for all the clotted beastliness, and he's never been in sight of a shell. I'm for putting him in the front line. No, I don't mean any Uriah the Hittite business. I want him to have a sporting chance, just what other men have. But by God, he's going to learn what is the upshot of the strings he's been pulling so merrily. He told me in 2 days' time Germany would smash our armies to hell. He boasted that he would be mostly responsible for it. Well, let him be there to see the smashing." "I reckon that's just," said Blenkiron. Ivory's eyes were on me now, fascinated and terrified, like those of a bird before a rattlesnake. I saw again the shapeless features of the man in the tube station, the residuum of shrinking mortality behind his disguises. He seemed to be slipping something from his pocket towards his mouth, but Geordie Hamilton caught his wrist. "What you offer?" said the scandalized voice of my servant. "Sir, the prisoner would appear to be trying to poison himself. Will I search him?" After that he stood with each arm in the grip of a warder. "Mr. Ivory," I said, "last night when I was in your power, you indulged your vanity by gloating over me. I expected it, for your class does not breed gentlemen. We treat our prisoners differently, but it is fair that you should know your fate. You are going into France, and I will see that you are taken to the British front. There, with my old division, you will learn something of the meaning of war. Understand that by no conceivable chance can you escape. Men will be detailed to watch you day and night, to see that you undergo the full rigour of the battlefield. You will have the same experience as other people, no more, no less. I believe in a righteous God, and I know that sooner or later you will find death, death at the hands of your own people, an honourable death which is far beyond your deserts. But before it comes you will have understood the hell to which you have condemned honest men. In moments of great fatigue, as in moments of great crisis, the mind takes charge and may run on a track independent of the will. It was not myself that spoke, but an impersonal voice which I did not know, a voice in whose tones rang a strange authority. Ivory recognized the icy finality of it, and his body seemed to wilt and droop. Only the hold of the warders kept him from falling. I, too, was about at the end of my endurance. I felt dimly that the room had emptied except for Blenkiron and Amos, and that the former was trying to make me drink brandy from the cup of a flask. I struggled to my feet with the intention of going to Mary, but my legs would not carry me. I heard, as in a dream, Amos giving thanks to an omnipotence in whom he officially disbelieved. "What's that old man in the Bible said? Now let thou thy servant depart at peace. That's the way I'm feeling myself." And then slumber came on me like an armed man, and in the chair by the dying wood ash I slept off the ache of my limbs, the tension of my nerves, and the confusion of my brain. Chapter 20 of Mr. Standfast by John Buchan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. The Storm Breaks in the West. The following evening, it was the 20th day of March, I started for France after the dark fell. I drove Ivory's big closed car, and within sat its owner, bound and gagged, as others had sat before him on the same errand. Geordie Hamilton and Amos were his companions. From what Blenkiron had himself discovered from the papers seized in the Pink Chalet, I had full details of the road and its mysterious stages. It was like the journey of a mad dream. In a back street of a little town I would exchange passwords with a nameless figure and be given instructions. At a wayside inn, at an appointed hour, a voice speaking in a thick German would advise me that this bridge or that railway crossing had been cleared. At a hamlet among pine woods an unknown man would clamber up beside me and take me past a sentry post. Smooth as clockwork was the machine, till in the dawn of a spring morning I found myself dropping into a broad valley, through little orchards just beginning to blossom, and I knew that I was in France. After that Blenkiron's own arrangements began, and soon I was drinking coffee with a young lieutenant of chasseurs, and had taken the gag from Ivory's mouth. The bluecoats looked curiously at the man in the green ulster, whose face was the colour of clay, and who lit cigarette from cigarette with a shaky hand. The lieutenant rang up a general of division who knew all about us. At his headquarters I explained my purpose, and he telegraphed to an army headquarters for a permission which was granted. It was not for nothing that in January I had seen certain great personages in Paris, and that Blenkiron had wired ahead of me to prepare the way. Here I handed over Ivory and his guard, for I wanted them to proceed to Amiens under French supervision, well knowing that the men of that great army are not used to let slip what they once hold. It was a morning of clear spring sunlight when we breakfasted in that little red-roofed town among vineyards with a shining river looping at our feet. The general of division was an Algerian veteran with a brush of grizzled hair, whose eye kept wandering to a map on the wall where pins and stretched thread made a spider's web. "Any news from the north?" I asked. "Not yet," he said, "but the attack comes soon. It will be against our army in Champagne." With a lean figure he pointed out the enemy dispositions. "Why not against the British?" I asked. With a knife and fork I made a right angle and put a salt dish in the centre. "That is the German concentration. They can so mass that we do not know which side of the angle they will strike till the blow falls." "It is true," he replied, "but consider. For the enemy to attack towards the Somme would be to fight over many miles of an old battleground where all is still desert, and every yard of which you British know. In Champagne, at a bound, he might enter unbroken country. It is a long and difficult road to Amiens, but not so long to Chillon. Such is the view of Pétain. Does it convince you?" "The reasoning is good. Nevertheless, he will strike at Amiens, and I think he will begin today." He laughed and shrugged his shoulders. "Nous verrons. You are obstinate, my general, like all your excellent countrymen." But as I left his headquarters an aide-de-camp handed him a message on a pink slip. He read it and turned to me with a grave face. "You have a flair, my friend. I am glad we did not wager. This morning at dawn there is great fighting around Saint-Quentin. Be comforted, for they will not pass. Your Maréchal will hold them." That was the first news I had of the battle. At Dijon, according to plan, I met the others. I only just caught the Paris train, and Blenkiron's great wrists lugged me into the carriage when it was well in motion. There sat Peter, a docile figure in a carefully patched old RFC uniform. Wake was reading a pile of French papers, and in a corner Mary, with her feet up on the seat, was sound asleep. We did not talk much, for the life of the past days had been so hectic that we had no wish to recall it. Blenkiron's face wore an air of satisfaction, and as he looked out at the sunny spring landscape he hummed his only tune. Even Wake had lost his restlessness. He had on a pair of big tortoiseshell reading glasses, and when he looked up from his newspaper and caught my eye he smiled. Mary slept like a child, delicately flushed, her breath scarcely stirring the collar of the greatcoat which was folded across her throat. I remember looking with a kind of awe at the curve of her young face and the long lashes that lay so softly on her cheek, and wondering how I had borne the anxiety of the last months. Wake raised his head from his reading, glanced at Mary and then at me, and his eyes were kind, almost affectionate. He seemed to have won peace of mind among the hills. Only Peter was out of the picture. He was a strange, disconsolate figure as he shifted about to ease his leg, or gazed incuriously from the window. He had shaved his beard again, but it did not make him younger, for his face was too lined and his eyes too old to change. When I spoke to him, he looked towards Mary and held up a warning finger. "I go back to England," he whispered. "Your little Missy is going to take care of me till I am settled. We spoke of it yesterday at my cottage. I will find a lodging and be patient till the war is over. And you, Dick?" "Oh, I rejoined my division. Thank God this job is over. I have an easy mind now and can turn my attention to straightforward soldiering. I don't mind telling you that I'll be glad to think that you and Mary and Blenkiron are safe at home. What about you, Wake?" "I go back to my Labour battalion," he said cheerfully. "Like you, I have an easier mind." I shook my head. "We'll see about that. I don't like such sinful waste. We've had a bit of campaigning together and I know your quality. The battalion's quite good enough for me," and he relapsed into a day-old ton. Mary had suddenly woke and was sitting upright with her fist in her eyes like a small child. Her hand flew to her hair and her eyes ran over us as if to see that we were all there. As she counted the four of us, she seemed relieved. "I reckon you feel refreshed, Miss Mary," said Blenkiron. "It's good to think that now we can sleep in peace, all of us. Pretty soon you'll be in England and spring will be beginning, and please God it'll be the start of a better world. Our work's over anyhow." "I wonder," said the girl gravely. "I don't think there's any discharge in this war. Dick, have you news of the battle? This was the day." "It's begun," I said, and I told him the little I had learned from the French general. I've made a reputation as a prophet, for he thought the attack was coming in Champagne. It's Saint-Quentin right enough, but I don't know what has happened. We'll hear in Paris." Mary had woke with a startled air, as if she remembered her old instinct that our work would not be finished without a sacrifice, and that sacrifice the best of us. The notion kept recurring to me with an uneasy insistence. But soon she appeared to forget her anxiety. That afternoon, as we journeyed through the pleasant land of France, she was in holiday mood, and she forced all our spirits up to her level. It was calm, bright weather. The long curves of ploughland were beginning to quicken into green. The catkins made a blue mist on the willows by the watercourses, and in the orchards by the red-roofed hamlets the blossom was breaking. In such a scene it was hard to keep the mind sober and grey, and the pall of war slid from us. Mary cosseted and fussed over Peter like an elder sister over a delicate little boy. She made him stretch his bad leg full length on the seat, and when she made tea for the party of us, it was a protesting Peter who had the last sugar biscuit. Indeed, we were almost a merry company, for Blenkiron told stories of old hunting and engineering days in the West, and Peter and I were driven to cap them, and Mary asked provocative questions, and Wake listened with amused interest. It was well that we had the carriage to ourselves, for no queerer rigs were ever assembled. Mary, as always, was neat and workmanlike in her dress. Blenkiron was magnificent in a suit of russet tweed with a pale blue shirt and collar and well-polished brown shoes. But Peter and Wake were in uniforms which had seen far better days, and I wore still the boots and the shapeless and ragged clothes of Joseph Zimmer, the porter from Arosa. We appeared to forget the war, but we didn't, for it was in the background of all our minds. Somewhere in the north there was raging a desperate fight, and its issue was the true test of our success or failure. Mary showed it by bidding me ask for news at every stopping place. I asked gendarmes and permissionnaires, but I learned nothing. Nobody had ever heard of the battle. The upshot was that for the last hour we all fell silent, and when we reached Paris about 7 o'clock, my first errand was to the bookstall. I bought a batch of evening papers, which we tried to read in the taxis that carried us to our hotel. Sure enough, there was the announcement in big headlines. The enemy had attacked in great strength from south of Arras to the Oise, but everywhere he had been repulsed and held in our battle zone. The leading articles were confident, the notes by the various military critics were almost braggart. At last the German had been driven to an offensive, and the Allies would have the opportunity they had longed for of proving their superior fighting strength. It was, said one and all, the opening of the last phase of the war. I confess that as I read, my heart sank. If the civilians were so overconfident, might not the generals have fallen into the same trap? Blenkiron alone was unperturbed. Mary said nothing, but she sat with her chin in her hands, which with her was a sure sign of deep preoccupation. Next morning the papers could tell us little more. The main attack had been on both sides of Saint-Quentin, and though the British had given ground, it was only the outposts line that had gone. The mist had favoured the enemy, and his bombardment had been terrific, especially the gas shells. Every journal added the old comment that he had paid heavily for his temerity, with losses far exceeding those of the defence. Wake appeared at breakfast in his private's uniform. He wanted to get his railway warrant and be off at once, but when I heard that Amiens was his destination, I ordered him to stay and travel with me in the afternoon. I was in uniform myself now and had taken charge of the outfit. I arranged that Blenkiron, Mary and Peter should go on to Boulogne and sleep the night there, while Wake and I would be dropped at Amiens to await instructions. I spent a busy morning. Once again I visited with Blenkiron the little cabinet in the Boulevard Saint-Germain and told in every detail our work of the past 2 months. Once again I sat in the low building beside the Invalides and talked to staff officers. But some of the men I had seen on the first visit were not there. The chiefs of the French army had gone north. We arranged for the handling of the wild birds, now safely in France, and sanction was given to the course I had proposed to adopt with Ivory. He and his guard were on their way to Amiens, and I would meet them there on the morrow. The great men were very complimentary to us, so complimentary that my knowledge of grammatical French ebbed away, and I could only stutter in reply. That telegram sent by Blenkiron on the night of the 18th, from the information given me in the Pink Chalet, had done wonders in clearing up the situation. But when I asked them about the battle, they could tell me little. It was a very serious attack in tremendous force, but the British line was strong and the reserves were believed to be sufficient. Pétain and Foch had gone north to consult with Haig. The situation in Champagne was still obscure, but some French reserves were already moving thence to the Somme sector. One thing they did show me, the British dispositions. As I looked at the plan, I saw that my old division was in the thick of the fighting. "Where do you go now?" I was asked. "To Amiens, and then, please God, to the battle front," I said. "Good fortune to you. You do not give body or mind much rest, my General." After that I went to the Mission Anglaise, but they had nothing beyond Haig's communiqué and a telephone message from GHQ that the critical sector was likely to be that between Saint-Quentin and the Oise. The northern pillar of our defence, south of Arras, which they had been nervous about, had stood like a rock. That pleased me, for my old battalion of the Lennox Highlanders was there. Crossing the Place de la Concorde, we fell in with a British staff officer of my acquaintance who was just starting to motor back to GHQ from Paris leave. He had a longer face than the people at the Invalides. "I don't like it, I tell you," he said. "It's this mist that worries me. I went down the whole line from Arras to the Oise 10 days ago. It was beautifully sited, the cleverest thing you ever saw. The outpost line was mostly a chain of blobs, redoubts, you know, with machine guns, so arranged as to bring flanking fire to bear on the advancing enemy. But mist would play the devil with that scheme, for the enemy would be past the place for flanking fire before we knew it. Oh, I know we had good warning and had the battle zone manned in time, but the outpost line was meant to hold out long enough to get everything behind in apple pie order, and I can't see but how big chunks of it must have gone in the first rush. Mind you, we've banked everything on that battle zone. It's damned good, but if it's gone—" He flung up his hands. "Have we good reserves?" I asked. He shrugged his shoulders. "Have we positions prepared behind the battle zone?" "I didn't notice any," he said dryly, and was off before I could get more out of him. "You look rattled, Dick," said Blenkiron as we walked to the hotel. "I seem to have got the needle. It's silly, but I feel worse about this show than I've ever felt since the war started. Look at this city here. The papers take it easily, and the people are walking about as if nothing was happening. Even the soldiers aren't worried. You may call me a fool to take it so hard, but I have a sense in my bones that we're in for the bloodiest and darkest fight of our lives, and that soon Paris will be hearing the Boche guns as she did in 1914. "You're a cheerful old Jeremiah. Well, I'm glad Miss Mary's going to be in England soon. Seems to me she's right, and that this game of ours isn't quite played out yet. I'm envying you some, for there's a place waiting for you in the fighting line. You've got to get home and keep people's heads straight there. That's the weak link in our chain, and there's a mighty lot of work before you." "Maybe," he said abstractedly, with his eye on the top of the Vendôme column. The train that afternoon was packed with officers recalled from leave, and it took all the combined purchase of Blenkiron and myself to get a carriage reserved for our little party. At the last moment I opened the door to admit a warm and agitating captain of the R.F.C., in whom I recognised my friend and benefactor, Archie Roylance. "Just when I was getting nice and clean and comfy, a wire comes telling me to bundle back, all along of a new battle. It's a cruel war, sir." The afflicted young man mopped his forehead, grinned cheerfully at Blenkiron, glanced critically at Peter, then caught sight of Mary, and grew at once acutely conscious of his appearance. He smoothed his hair, adjusted his tie, and became desperately sedate. I introduced him to Peter, and he promptly forgot Mary's existence. If Peter had had any vanity in him, it would have been flattered by the frank interest and admiration in the boy's eyes. "I'm tremendously glad to see you safe back, sir. I've always hoped I might get a chance of meeting you. We want you badly now in the front. Lench is getting a bit uppish." Then his eye fell on Peter's withered leg, and he saw that he had blundered. He blushed scarlet and looked his apologies. But they weren't needed, for it cheered Peter to meet someone who talked of the possibility of his fighting again. Soon the two were deep in technicalities, the appalling technicalities of the airmen. It was no good listening to their talk, for you could make nothing of it, but it was bracing up Peter like wine. Archie gave him a minute description of Lench's latest doings and his new methods. He too had heard the rumour that Peter had mentioned to me at St. Anton, of a new Boche plane with mighty engines and stumpy wings cunningly cambered, which was a devil to climb, but no specimens had yet appeared over the line. They talked of Bali and Rice Davids and Bishop and McCudden, and all the heroes who had won their spurs since the Somme, and of the new British makes, most of which Peter had never seen and had to have explained to him. Outside a haze had drawn over the meadows with the twilight. I pointed it out to Blenkiron. "There's the fog that's doing us. This March weather is just like October, mist morning and evening. I wish to heaven we could have some good old drenching spring rain." Archie was discoursing on the Shark Gladys machine. "I've always stuck to it, for it's a marvel in its way, but it has my heart fairly broke. The General here knows its little tricks, don't you, sir? Whenever things get really excitin', the engine's apt to quit work and take a rest." "The whole make should be publicly burned," I said with gloomy recollections. "I wouldn't go so far, sir. The old Gladys has surprisin' merits. On her day there's nothing like her for pace and climbing power, and she steers as sweet as a racing cutter. The trouble about her is she's too complicated. She's like some breeds of car. You want to be a mechanical genius to understand her. If they'd only get her a little simpler and safer, there wouldn't be her match in the field. I'm about the only man that has patience with her and knows her merits, but she's often been nearly the death of me. All the same, if I were in for a big fight against some fellow like Lench, where it was neck or nothing, I'm hanged if I wouldn't pick the Gladys." Archie laughed apologetically. "The subject is banned for me in our mess. I'm the old thing's only champion, and she's like a mare I used to hunt that loved me so much she was always trying to chew the arm off me. But I wish I could get her a fair trial from one of the big pilots. I'm only in the second class myself." We were running north through Saint-Just when above the rattle of the train rose a curious dull sound. It came from the east and was like the low growl of a veld thunderstorm or a steady roll of muffled drums. "Hark to the guns!" cried Archie. "My aunt, there's a tidy bombardment going on somewhere." I had been listening on and off to guns for 3 years. I had been present at the big preparations before Loos and the Somme and Arras, and I had come to accept the racket of artillery as something natural and inevitable, like rain or sunshine. But this sound chilled me with its eeriness. I don't know why. Perhaps it was its unexpectedness, for I was sure that the guns had not been heard in this area since before the Marne. The noise must be travelling down the Oise valley, and I judged there was big fighting somewhere about Chauny or La Fère. That meant that the enemy was pressing hard on a huge front, for here was clearly a great effort on its extreme left wing. Unless it was our counter-attack, but somehow I didn't think so. I let down the window and stuck my head into the night. The fog had crept up to the edge of the track, a gossamer mist through which houses and trees and cattle could be seen dim in the moonlight. The noise continued, not a mutter, but a steady rumbling flow as solid as the blare of a trumpet. Presently, as we drew nearer Amiens, we left it behind us, for in all the Somme valley there is some curious configuration which blankets sound. The country folk call it the Silent Land, and during the first phase of the Somme battle a man in Amiens could not hear the guns 20 miles off at Albert. As I sat down again, I found that the company had fallen silent, even the garrulous Archie. Mary's eyes met mine, and in the indifferent light of the French railway carriage I could see excitement in them. I knew it was excitement, not fear. She had never heard the noise of a great barrage before. Blenkiron was restless, and Peter was sunk in his own thoughts. I was growing very depressed, for in a little I would have to part from my best friends and the girl I loved. But with the depression was mixed an odd expectation, which was almost pleasant. The guns had brought back my profession to me. I was moving towards their thunder, and God only knew the end of it. The happy dream I had dreamed of in the Cotswolds and a home with Mary beside me seemed suddenly to have fallen away to an infinite distance. I felt once again that I was on the razor edge of life. The last part of the journey I was casting back to rake up my knowledge of the countryside. I saw again the stricken belt from Serres to Combles, where we had fought in the summer of '17. I had not been present in the advance of the following spring, but I had been at Cambrai, and I knew all the down country from Lagnicourt to Saint-Quentin. I shut my eyes and tried to picture it, and to see the roads running up to the line, and wondered just at what points the big pressure had come. They had told me in Paris that the British were as far south as the Oise, so the bombardment we had heard must be directed to our address. With Passchendaele and Cambrai in my mind, and with some notion of the difficulty we always had in getting drafts, I was puzzled to think where we could have found the troops to man the new front. We must be unholily thin on that long line, and against that awesome bombardment, and the masses and the new tactics that Ivory had bragged of. When we ran into the dingy cavern, which is Amiens station, I seemed to note a new excitement. I felt it in the air rather than deduced it from any special incident, except that the platform was very crowded with civilians, most of them with an extra amount of baggage. I wondered if the place had been bombed the night before. "We won't say goodbye yet," I told the others. "The train doesn't leave for half an hour. I'm off to try and get news." Accompanied by Archie, I hunted out an RTO of my acquaintance. To my questions he responded cheerfully. "Oh, we're doing famously, sir. I heard this afternoon from a man in operations that GHQ was perfectly satisfied. We've killed a lot of Huns and lost only a few kilometres of ground. You're going to your division? Well, it's up Peronne way, or was last night. Chain and Dunthorpe came back from leave and tried to steal a car to get up to it. Oh, I'm having a deuce of a time. These blighted civilians have got the wind up and a lot are trying to clear out. The idiots say the Huns will be in Amiens in a week. What's the phrase? Pourvu que les civils tiennent. Afraid I must push on, sir." I sent Archie back with these scraps of news and was about to make a rush for the house of one of the press officers who would, I thought, be in the way of knowing things, when at the station entrance I ran across Laidlaw. He had been BGGS in the corps to which my old brigade belonged, and was now on the staff of some army. He was striding towards a car when I grabbed his arm, and he turned on me a very sick face. "Good Lord, Hannay, where did you spring from? The news, you say?" He sank his voice and drew me into a quiet corner. "The news is hellish." "They told me we were holding," I observed. "Holding be damned. The Boche is clean through on a broad front. He broke us today at Messumy and Essigny. Yes, the battle zone. He's flinging in division after division like the blows of a hammer. What else could you expect?" And he clutched my arm fiercely. "How in God's name could 11 divisions hold a front of 40 miles? And against 4 to 1 in numbers? It isn't war, it's naked lunacy." I knew the worst now, and it didn't shock me, for I had known it was coming. Laidlaw's nerves were pretty bad, for his face was pale and his eyes bright like a man with a fever. "Reserves!" And he laughed bitterly. "We have 3 infantry divisions and 2 cavalry. They're into the mill long ago. The French are coming up on our right, but they've the devil of a way to go. That's what I'm down here about. And we're getting help from Horn and Plummer. But all that takes days, and meantime we're walking back like we did at Mons. And at this time of day, too. Oh, yes, the whole line's retreating. Parts of it were pretty comfortable, but they had to get back or be put in the bag. I wish to heaven I knew where our right divisions have got to. For all I know, they're at Compiègne by now. The Boche was over the canal this morning, and by this time, most likely, he's across the Somme." At that I exclaimed, "Do you mean to tell me we're going to lose Peronne?" "Peronne!" he cried. "We'll be lucky not to lose Amiens. And on top of it all, I've got some kind of blasted fever. I'll be raving in an hour." He was rushing off, but I held him. "What about my old lot?" I asked. "Oh, damn good, but they're all shot to bits. Every division did well. It's a marvel they weren't all scuppered, and it'll be a flaming miracle if they find a line they can stand on. Westwater's got a leg smashed. He was brought down this evening, and you'll find him in the hospital. Fraser's killed, and Lefroy's a prisoner. At least that was my last news. I don't know who's got the brigades, but Masterton's carrying on with the division. You'd better get up the line as fast as you can and take over from him. See the army commander. He'll be in Amiens tomorrow morning for a powwow." Laidlaw laid wearily back in his car and disappeared into the night while I hurried to the train. The others had descended to the platform and were grouped around Archie, who was discoursing optimistic nonsense. I got them into the carriage and shut the door. "It's pretty bad," I said. "The front's pierced in several places and we're back to the upper Somme. I'm afraid it isn't going to stop there. I'm off up the line as soon as I can get my orders. Wake, you'll come with me, for every man will be wanted. Blenkiron, you'll see Mary and Peter safe to England. We're just in time, for tomorrow it mightn't be easy to get out of Amiens." I can see yet the anxious faces in that ill-lit compartment. We said goodbye after the British style, without much to do. I remember that old Peter gripped my hand as if he would never release it, and that Mary's face had grown very pale. If I delayed another second I should have howled, for Mary's lips were trembling and Peter had eyes like a wounded stag. "God bless you," I said hoarsely, and as I went off I heard Peter's voice, a little cracked, saying, "God bless you, my old friend." I spent some weary hours looking for Westwater. He was not in the big clearing station, but I ran him to earth at last in the new hospital which had just got going in the Ursuline convent. He was the most sterling little man, in ordinary life rather dry and dogmatic, with a trick of taking you up sharply, which didn't make him popular. Now he was lying very stiff and quiet in the hospital bed, and his blue eyes were solemn and pathetic like a sick dog's. "There's nothing much wrong with me," he said, in reply to my question. "A shell dropped beside me and damaged my foot. They say they'll have to cut it off. I've an easier mind now you're here, Hannay. Of course you'll take over from Masterton. He's a good man, but not quite up to his job. Poor Fraser. You've heard about Fraser. He was done in at the very start. Yes, a shell. And Lefroy. If he's alive and not too badly smashed, the Hun has got a troublesome prisoner." He was too sick to talk, but he wouldn't let me go. "The division was all right. Don't you believe anyone who says we didn't fight like heroes. Our outpost line held up the Hun for 6 hours, and only about a dozen men came back. We could have stuck it out in the battle zone if both flanks hadn't been turned. They got through Crab's Left and came down the Vuray ravine, and a big wave rushed Shropshire Wood. We fought it out yard by yard and didn't budge till we saw the Plessis dump blazing in our rear. Then it was about time to go. We haven't many battalion commanders left. Watson, Endicott, Crochet." He stammered out a list of gallant fellows who had gone. "Get back double quick, Hannay. They want you. I'm not happy about Masterton. He's too young for the job." And then a nurse drove me out, and I left him speaking in the strange forced voice of great weakness. At the foot of the staircase stood Mary. "I saw you go in," she said, "so I waited for you." "Oh, my dear," I cried, "you should have been in Boulogne by now. What madness brought you here?" "They know me here and they've taken me on. You couldn't expect me to stay behind. You said yourself everybody was wanted, and I'm in a service like you. Please don't be angry, Dick." I wasn't angry. I wasn't even extra anxious. The whole thing seemed to have been planned by fate since the creation of the world. The game we had engaged in wasn't finished, and it was right that we should play it out together. With that feeling came a conviction, too, of ultimate victory. Somehow or sometime we should get to the end of our pilgrimage. But I remembered Mary's forebodings about the sacrifice required. The best of us. That ruled me out, but what about her? I caught her to my arms. "Good-bye, my very dearest. Don't worry about me, for mine's a soft job, and I can look after my skin. But oh, take care of yourself, for you are all the world to me." She kissed me gravely like a wise child. "I am not afraid for you," she said. "You are going to stand in the breach, and I know you will win. Remember that there is someone here whose heart is so full of pride of her man that it hasn't room for fear." As I went out of the convent door, I felt that once again I had been given my orders. It did not surprise me that, when I sought out my room on an upper floor of the Hôtel de France, I found Blenkiron in the corridor. He was in the best of spirits. "You can't keep me out of the show, Dick," he said, "so you needn't start arguing. Why, this is the one original chance of a lifetime for John S. Blenkiron. Our little fight at Erzurum was only a sideshow, but this is a real high-class Armageddon. I guess I'll find a way to make myself useful." I had no doubt he would, and I was glad he had stayed behind. But I felt it was hard on Peter to have the job of returning to England alone at such a time, like useless flotsam washed up by a flood. "You needn't worry," said Blenkiron. "Peter's not making England this trip. To the best of my knowledge he has beat it out of this township by the eastern postern." He had some talk with Sir Archibald Roylance, and presently other gentlemen of the Royal Flying Corps appeared, and the upshot was that Sir Archibald hitched on to Peter's grip and departed without saying farewell. My notion is that he's gone to have a few words with his old friends at some flying station, or he might have the idea of going back to England by aeroplane, and so having one last flutter before he folds his wings. Anyhow, Peter looked a mighty happy man. The last I saw he was smoking his pipe with a batch of young lads in a Flying Corps wagon and heading straight for Germany. Chapter 21 of Mr. Standfast by John Buchan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21. How an Exile Returned to His Own People. Next morning I found the army commander on his way to Doulon. "Take over the division?" he said. "Certainly. I'm afraid there isn't much left of it. I'll tell Carr to get through to the Corps headquarters when he can find them. You'll have to nurse the remnants, for they can't be pulled out yet, not for a day or two. Bless me, Hannay, there are parts of our line which we're holding with a man and a boy. You've got to stick it out till the French take over. We're not hanging on by our eyelids, it's our eyelashes now." "What about positions to fall back on, sir?" I asked. "We're doing our best, but we haven't enough men to prepare them." He plucked open a map. "There we're digging a line, and there. If we can hold that bit for 2 days, we shall have a fair line resting on the river, but we mayn't have time." Then I told him about Blenkiron, whom of course he had heard of. "He was one of the biggest engineers in the States, and he's got a nailing fine eye for country. He'll make good somehow if you let him help in the job." "The very fellow," he said, and he wrote an order. "Take this to Jacks and he'll fix up a temporary commission. Your man can find a uniform somewhere in Amiens." After that I went to the detail camp and found that Ivery had duly arrived. "The prisoner has given no trouble, sir," Hamilton reported, "but he's a wee thing peevish. They're saying that the Germans is getting on fine, and I was telling him that he should be proud of his ain folk. But he wasn't verra weel pleased." 3 days had wrought a transformation in Ivery. That face, once so cool and capable, was now sharpened like a hunted beast's. His imagination was preying on him, and I could picture its torture. He, who had been always at the top directing the machine, was now only a cog in it. He had never in his life been anything but powerful. Now he was impotent. He was in a hard, unfamiliar world, in the grip of something which he feared and didn't understand, in the charge of men who were in no way amenable to his persuasiveness. It was like a proud and bullying manager suddenly forced to labour in a squad of navvies, and worse, for there was the gnawing physical fear of what was coming. He made an appeal to me. "Do the English torture their prisoners?" he asked. "You have beaten me, I own it, and I plead for mercy. I will go on my knees if you like. I am not afraid of death, in my own way." Few people are afraid of death, in their own way. "Why do you degrade me? I am a gentleman." "Not as we define the thing," I said. His jaw dropped. "What are you going to do with me?" he quavered. "You have been a soldier," I said. "You are going to see a little fighting from the ranks. There will be no brutality. You will be armed if you want to defend yourself. You will have the same chance of survival as the men around you. You may have heard that your countrymen are doing well. It is even possible that they may win the battle. What was your forecast to me? Amiens in 2 days, Abbeville in 3? Well, you are a little behind scheduled time, but still you are prospering. You told me that you were the chief architect of all this, and you are going to be given the chance of seeing it, perhaps of sharing in it, from the other side. Does it not appeal to your sense of justice?" He groaned and turned away. I had no more pity for him than I would have had for a black mamba that had killed my friend and was now caught to a cleft tree. Nor, oddly enough, had Wake. If we had shot Ivery outright at St. Anton, I am certain that Wake would have called us murderers. Now he was in complete agreement. His passionate hatred of war made him rejoice that a chief contriver of war should be made to share in its terrors. "He tried to talk me over this morning," he told me, "claimed he was on my side, and said the kind of thing I used to say last year. It made me rather ashamed of some of my past performances to hear that scoundrel imitating them. By the way, Hannay, what are you going to do with me?" "You're coming on my staff. You're a stout fellow, and I can't do without you." "Remember, I won't fight." "You won't be asked to. We're trying to stem the tide which wants to roll to the sea. You know how the Boche behaves in occupied country, and Mary's in Amiens." At that news he shut his lips. "Still," he began. "Still," I said, "I don't ask you to forfeit one of your blessed principles. You needn't fire a shot. But I want a man to carry orders for me, for we haven't a line any more, only a lot of blobs like Quicksilver. I want a clever man for the job and a brave one, and I know that you're not afraid." "No," he said, "I don't think I am, much. Well, I'm content." I started Blenkiron off in a car for Corps Headquarters, and in the afternoon took the road myself. I knew every inch of the country, the lift of the hill east of Amiens, the Roman highway that ran straight as an arrow to Saint-Quentin, the marshy lagoons of the Somme, and that broad strip of land wasted by battle between Dompierre and Péronne. I had come to Amiens through it in January, for I had been up to the line before I left for Paris, and then it had been a peaceful place with peasants tilling their fields, and new buildings going up on the old battlefield, and carpenters busy at cottage roofs, and scarcely a transport wagon on the road to remind one of war. Now the main route was choked like the Albert road when the Somme battle first began, troops going up and troops coming down, the latter in the last stage of weariness, a ceaseless traffic of ambulances one way and ammunition wagons the other, busy staff cars trying to worm a way through the mass, strings of gun horses, oddments of cavalry, and here and there blue French uniforms. All that I had seen before, but one thing was new to me. Little country carts with sad-faced women and mystified children in them, and piles of household plenishing were creeping westward, or stood waiting at village doors. Beside these tramped old men and boys, mostly in their Sunday best, as if they were going to church. I had never seen the sight before, for I had never seen the British army falling back. The dam which held up the waters had broken, and the dwellers in the valley were trying to save their pitiful little treasures. And over everything, horse and man, cart and wheelbarrow, road and tillage, lay the white March dust. The sky was as blue as June, small birds were busy in the copses, and in the corners of abandoned gardens I had a glimpse of the first violets. Presently, as we topped a rise, we came within full noise of the guns. That too was new to me, for it was no ordinary bombardment. There was a special quality in the sound, something ragged, straggling, intermittent, which I had never heard before. It was the sign of open warfare and a moving battle. At Peronne, from which the newly returned inhabitants had a second time fled, the battle seemed to be at the doors. There I had news of my division. It was farther south, towards Saint-Christ. We groped our way among bad roads to where its headquarters were believed to be, while the voice of the guns grew louder. They turned out to be those of another division, which was busy getting ready to cross the river. Then the dark fell, and while airplanes flew west into the sunset, there was a redder sunset in the east, where the unceasing flashes of gunfire were pale against the angry glow of burning dumps. The sight of the bonnet badge of a Scots Fusilier made me halt, and the man turned out to belong to my division. Half an hour later I was taking over from the much relieved Masterton in the ruins of what had once been a sugar beet factory. There, to my surprise, I found Lefroy. The Boche had held him prisoner for precisely 8 hours. During that time he had been so interested in watching the way the enemy handled an attack that he had forgotten the miseries of his position. He described with blasphemous admiration the endless wheel by which supplies and reserve troops move up, the silence, the smoothness, the perfect discipline. Then he realized that he was a captive and unwounded, and had gone mad. Being a heavyweight boxer of note, he had sent his 2 guards spinning into a ditch, dodged the ensuing shots, and found shelter in the lee of a blazing ammunition dump where his pursuers hesitated to follow. Then he had spent an anxious hour trying to get through an outpost line, which he thought was Boche. Only by overhearing an exchange of oaths in the accents of Dundee did he realize that it was our own. It was a comfort to have Lefroy back, for he was both stout-hearted and resourceful. But I found that I had a division only on paper. It was about the strength of a brigade, the brigade's battalions, and the battalion's companies. This is not the place to write the story of the week that followed. I could not write it even if I wanted to, for I don't know it. There was a plan somewhere, which you will find in the history books, but with me it was blank chaos. Orders came, but long before they arrived the situation had changed, and I could no more obey them than fly to the moon. Often I had lost touch with the divisions on both flanks. Intelligence arrived erratically out of the void, and for the most part we worried along without it. I heard we were under the French. First it was said to be Foch, and then Fayolle, whom I had met in Paris. But the higher command seemed 1,000,000 miles away, and we were left to use our mother wits. My problem was to give ground as slowly as possible, and at the same time not to delay too long, for retreat we must, with the Boche sending in brand new divisions each morning. It was a kind of war worlds distant from the old trench battles, and since I had been taught no other, I had to invent rules as I went along. Looking back, it seems a miracle that any of us came out of it. Only the grace of God and the uncommon toughness of the British soldier bluffed the Hun and prevented him pouring through the breach to Abbeville and the sea. We were no better than a mosquito curtain stuck in a doorway to stop the advance of an angry bull. The army commander was right. We were hanging on with our eyelashes. We must have been easily the weakest part of the whole front, for we were holding a line which was never less than 2 miles, and was often, as I judged, nearer 5, and there was nothing in reserve to us except some oddments of cavalry who chased about the whole battlefield under vague orders. Mercifully for us the Boche blundered. Perhaps he did not know our condition, for our airmen were magnificent, and you never saw a Boche plane over our line by day, though they bombed us merrily by night. If he had called our bluff we should have been done, but he put his main strength to the north and the south of us. North he pressed hard on the Third Army, but he got well hammered by the Guards north of Bapaume, and he could make no headway at Arras. South he drove at the Paris railway and down the Oise valley, but there Pétain's reserves had arrived, and the French made a noble stand. Not that he didn't fight hard in the centre where we were, but he hadn't his best troops, and after we got west of the bend of the Somme he was outrunning his heavy guns. Still, it was a desperate enough business, for our flanks were all the time falling back, and we had to conform to movements we could only guess at. After all, we were on the direct route to Amiens, and it was up to us to yield slowly so as to give Haig and Pétain time to get up supports. I was a miser about every yard of ground, for every yard and every minute were precious. We alone stood between the enemy and the city, and in the city was Mary. If you ask me about our plans, I can't tell you. I had a new one every hour. I got instructions from the Corps, but as I have said, they were usually out of date before they arrived, and most of my tactics I had to invent myself. I had a plain task, and to fulfill it I had to use what methods the Almighty allowed me. I hardly slept, I ate little, I was on the move day and night, but I never felt so strong in my life. It seemed as if I couldn't tire, and oddly enough I was happy. If a man's whole being is focused on one aim, he has no time to worry. I remember we were all very gentle and soft-spoken those days. Lefroy, whose tongue was famous for its edge, now cooed like a dove. The troops were on their uppers, but as steady as rocks. We were against the end of the world, and that stiffens a man. Day after day saw the same performance. I held my wavering front with an outpost line which delayed each new attack till I could take its bearings. I had special companies for counter-attack at selected points when I wanted time to retire the rest of the division. I think we must have fought more than a dozen of such little battles. We lost men all the time, but the enemy made no big scoop, though he was always on the edge of one. Looking back, it seems like a succession of miracles. Often I was in one end of a village when the Boche was in the other. Our batteries were always on the move, and the work of the gunners was past praising. Sometimes we faced east, sometimes north, and once at a most critical moment due south, for our front waved and blew like a flag at a masthead. Thank God the enemy was getting away from his big engine, and his ordinary troops were fagged and poor in quality. It was when his fresh shock battalions came on that I held my breath. He had a heathenish amount of machine guns, and he used them beautifully. Oh, I take my hat off to the Boche performance. He was doing what we had tried to do at the Somme and the Aisne and Arras and Ypres, and he was more or less succeeding. And the reason was that he was going bald-headed for victory. The men, as I have said, were wonderfully steady and patient under the fiercest trials that soldiers can endure. I had all kinds in the division, old army, new army, territorials, and you couldn't pick and choose between them. They fought like Trojans, and dirty, weary, and hungry, found still some salt of humour in their sufferings. It was a proof of the rock-bottom sanity of human nature, but we had one man with us who was hardly sane. In the hustle of those days I now and then caught sight of Ivory. I had to be everywhere at all hours, and often visited that remnant of Scots Fusiliers into which the subtlest brain in Europe had been drafted. He and his keepers were never on outpost duty or in any counter-attack. They were part of the mass whose only business was to retire discreetly. This was child's play to Hamilton, who had been out since Mons, and Amos, after taking a day to get used to it, wrapped himself in his grim philosophy and rather enjoyed it. You couldn't surprise Amos any more than a Turk. But the man with them, whom they never left, that was another matter. For the first wee bit, Hamilton reported, we thought he was gone daft. Every shell that came near he jumped like a young horse. And the gas, we had to tie on his mask for him, for his hands were fushionless. There was whiles that he wasn't a be hindered from standing up and talking to hisself, though the bullets was spitting. He was what you call demoralised. Syne he got as though he didna hear or see onything. He did what we telled him, and when we let him be, he sat down and grat. He's aye greeting, "Queer thing, sir, but the Germans canna hit him. I'm aye shaking bullets out of my claes, and I got a hole in my shoulder, and Andrew took a bash on his tin that would have felled anybody that hadn't a head like a stot. But, sir, the prisoner takes no skaith. Our boys are feared of him. There was an Irishman says to me that he had the evil eye, and ye can see for yourself that he's no canny." I saw that his skin had become like parchment, and that his eyes were glassy. I don't think he recognised me. "Does he take his meals?" I asked. "He doesn't eat muckle, but he has an unco thirst. Ye canna keep him off the men's water bottles." He was learning very fast the meaning of that war he had so confidently played with. I believe I am a merciful man, but as I looked at him I felt no vestige of pity. He was dreeing the weird he had prepared for others. I thought of Scudder, of the 1,000 friends I had lost, of the great seas of blood and the mountains of sorrow this man and his like had made for the world. Out of the corner of my eye I could see the long ridges above Comble and Longueval, which the salt of the earth had fallen to win, and which were again under the hoof of the Boche. I thought of the distracted city behind us, and what it meant to me, and the weak, the pitifully weak screen which was all its defence. I thought of the foul deeds which had made the German name to stink by land and sea, foulness of which he was the arch begetter. And then I was amazed at our forbearance. He would go mad, and madness for him was more decent than sanity. I had another man who wasn't what you might call normal, and that was Wake. He was the opposite of shell-shocked, if you understand me. He had never been properly under fire before, but he didn't give a straw for it. I had known the same thing with other men, and they generally ended by crumpling up, for it isn't natural that 5 or 6 feet of human flesh shouldn't be afraid of what can torture and destroy it. The natural thing is to be always a little scared, like me, but by an effort of the will and attention to work to contrive to forget it. But Wake apparently never gave it a thought. He wasn't foolhardy, only indifferent. He used to go about with a smile on his face, a smile of contentment. Even the horrors, and we had plenty of them, didn't affect him. His eyes, which used to be hot, had now a curious open innocence like Peter's. I would have been happier if he had been a little rattled. One night, after we had had a bad day of anxiety, I talked to him as we smoked in what had once been a French dugout. He was an extra right arm to me, and I told him so. "This must be a queer experience for you," I said. "Yes," he replied, "it is very wonderful. I did not think a man could go through it and keep his reason. But I know many things I did not know before. I know that the soul can be reborn without leaving the body." I stared at him, and he went on without looking at me. "You're not a classical scholar, Hannay? There was a strange cult in the ancient world, the worship of Magna Mater, the Great Mother. To enter into her mysteries the votary passed through a bath of blood. I think I am passing through that bath. I think that, like the initiate, I shall be renatus in aeternum, reborn into the eternal." I advised him to have a drink, for that talk frightened me. It looked as if he were becoming what the Scots call fey. Lefroy noticed the same thing, and was always speaking about it. He was as brave as a bull himself, and with very much the same kind of courage, but Wake's gallantry perturbed him. "I can't make the chap out," he told me. "He behaves as if his mind was too full of better things to give a damn for Boche guns. He doesn't take foolish risks, I don't mean that, but he behaves as if risks didn't signify. It's positively eerie to see him making notes with a steady hand when shells are dropping like hailstones and we're all thinking every minute's our last. You've got to be careful with him, sir. He's a long sight too valuable for us to spare." Lefroy was right about that, for I don't know what I should have done without him. The worst part of our job was to keep touch with our flanks, and that was what I used Wake for. He covered country like a moss trooper, sometimes on a rusty bicycle, oftener on foot, and you couldn't tire him. I wonder what other divisions thought of the grimy private who was our chief means of communication. He knew nothing of military affairs before, but he got the hang of this rough-and-tumble fighting as if he had been born for it. He never fired a shot, he carried no arms, the only weapons he used were his brains, and they were the best conceivable. I never met a staff officer who was so quick at getting a point or at sizing up a situation. He had put his back into the business, and first-class talent is not common anywhere. One day a GSO from a neighbouring division came to see me. "Where on earth did you pick up that man Wake?" he asked. He's a conscientious objector and a non-combatant, I said. Then I wish to heaven we had a few more conscientious objectors in this show. He's the only fellow who seems to know anything about this blessed battle. My general's sending you a chit about him." "No need," I said, laughing. "I know his value. He's an old friend of mine." I used Wake as my link with Corps Headquarters, and especially with Blenkiron. For about the 6th day of the show I was beginning to get rather desperate. This kind of thing couldn't go on for ever. We were miles back now, behind the old line of 17, and, as we rested one flank on the river, the immediate situation was a little easier. But I had lost a lot of men, and those that were left were blind with fatigue. The big bulges of the enemy to north and south had added to the length of the total front, and I found I had to fan out my thin ranks. The Boche was still pressing on, though his impetus was slacker. If he knew how little there was to stop him in my section, he might make a push which would carry him to Amiens. Only the magnificent work of our airmen had prevented him from getting that knowledge, but we couldn't keep the secrecy up forever. Some day an enemy plane would get over, and it only needed the drive of a fresh storm battalion or two to scatter us. I wanted a good prepared position, with sound trenches and decent wiring. Above all, I wanted reserves. Reserves. The word was on my lips all day, and it haunted my dreams. I was told that the French were to relieve us, but when? When? My reports to Corps Headquarters were one long wail for more troops. I knew there was a position prepared behind us, but I needed men to hold it. Wake brought in a message from Blenkiron. "We're waiting for you, Dick," he wrote, "and we've gotten quite a nice little home ready for you. The old man hasn't hustled so hard since he struck copper in Montana in '92. We've dug 3 lines of trenches and made a heap of pretty redoubts, and I guess they're well laid out, for the Army staff has supervised them, and they're no slouches at this brand of engineering. You would have laughed to see the labour we employed. We had all breeds of Dago and Chinamen, and some of your own South African blacks, and they got so busy on the job they forgot about bedtime. I used to be reckoned a bit of a slave driver, but my special talents weren't needed with this push. I'm going to put a lot of money into foreign missions henceforward." I wrote back, "Your trenches are no good without men. For God's sake get something that can hold a rifle. My lot are done to the world." Then I left Lefroy with the division and went down on the back of an ambulance to see for myself. I found Blenkiron, some of the Army engineers, and a staff officer from Corps Headquarters, and I found Archie Roylance. They had dug a mighty good line and wired it nobly. It ran from the river to the wood of La Bruyère, on the little hill above the Ablain stream. It was desperately long, but I saw at once it couldn't well be shorter, for the division on the south of us had its hands full with the fringe of the big thrust against the French. "It's no good blinking the facts," I told them. "I haven't 1,000 men, and what I have are at the end of their tether. If you put 'em in these trenches, they'll go to sleep on their feet. When can the French take over?" I was told that it had been arranged for next morning, but that it had now been put off 24 hours. It was only a temporary measure, pending the arrival of British divisions from the north. Archie looked grave. "The Boche is pushing up new troops in this sector. We got the news before I left squadron headquarters. It looks as if it would be a near thing, sir." "It won't be a near thing. It's an absolute black certainty. My fellows can't carry on as they are another day. Great God, they've had a fortnight in hell. Find me more men, or we buckle up at the next push." My temper was coming very near its limits. "We've raked the country with a small-tooth comb, sir," said one of the staff officers, "and we've raised a scratch pack, best part of 2,000. Good men, but most of them know nothing about infantry fighting. We've put them into platoons and done our best to give them some kind of training. There's one thing may cheer you. We've plenty of machine guns. There's a machine gun school nearby, and we got all the men who were taking the course and all the plant." I don't suppose there was ever such a force put into the field before. It was a wilder medley than Mouchy's camp followers at First Ypres. There was every kind of detail in the shape of men returning from leave, representing most of the regiments in the army. There were the men from the machine gun school. There were corps troops, sappers and ASC, and a handful of corps cavalry. Above all, there was a batch of American engineers, fathered by Blenkiron. I inspected them where they were drilling and liked the look of them. 48 hours, I said to myself. With luck, we may just pull it off. Then I borrowed a bicycle and went back to the division. But before I left, I had a word with Archie. This is one big game of bluff, and it's you fellows alone that enable us to play it. Tell your people that everything depends on them. They mustn't stint the planes in this sector, for if the Boche once suspicions how little he's got before him, the game's up. He's not a fool, and he knows that this is the shortest road to Amiens, but he imagines we're holding it in strength. If we keep up the fiction for another 2 days, the thing's done. You say he's pushing up troops? Yes, and he's sending forward his tanks. Well, that'll take time. He's slower now than a week ago, and he's got a deuce of a country to march over. There's still an outside chance we may win through. You go home and tell the RFC what I've told you." He nodded. "By the way, sir, Pienaar's with the squadron. He would like to come up and see you." "Archie," I said solemnly, "be a good chap and do me a favour. If I think Peter's anywhere near the line, I'll go off my head with worry. This is no place for a man with a bad leg. He should have been in England days ago. Can't you get him off, to Amiens anyhow?" "We scarcely like to. You see, we're all desperately sorry for him. His fun gone and his career over and all that. He likes being with us and listening to our yarns. He has been up once or twice too. The Shark Gladys. He swears it's a great make, and certainly he knows how to handle the little devil." "Then for heaven's sake don't let him do it again. I look to you, Archie. Remember. Promise." "Funny thing, but he's always worrying about you. He has a map on which he marks every day the changes in position, and he'd hobble a mile to pump any of our fellows who've been up your way." That night, under cover of darkness, I drew back the division to the newly prepared lines. We got away easily, for the enemy was busy with his own affairs. I suspected a relief by fresh troops. There was no time to lose, and I can tell you, I toiled to get things straight before dawn. I would have liked to send my own fellows back to rest, but I couldn't spare them yet. I wanted them to stiffen the fresh lot, for they were veterans. The new position was arranged on the same principles as the old front, which had been broken on March 21st. There was our forward zone, consisting of an outpost line and redoubts, very cleverly sited with a line of resistance. Well behind it were the trenches which formed the battle zone. Both zones were heavily wired, and we had plenty of machine guns. I wish I could say we had plenty of men who knew how to use them. The outposts were merely to give the alarm and fall back to the line of resistance, which was to hold out to the last. In the forward zone I put the freshest of my own men, the units being brought up to something like strength by the details returning from leave that the Corps had commandeered. With them I put the American engineers, partly in the redoubts and partly in companies for counter-attack. Blenkiron had reported that they could shoot like Dan'l Boone and were simply spoiling for a fight. The rest of the force was in the battle zone, which was our last hope. If that went, the Boche had a clear walk to Amiens. Some additional field batteries had been brought up to support our very weak divisional artillery. The front was so long that I had to put all three of my emaciated brigades at the line, so I had nothing to speak of in reserve. It was a most almighty gamble. We had found shelter just in time. At 6:30 next day, for a change it was a clear morning with clouds beginning to bank up from the west, the Boche let us know he was alive. He gave us a good drenching with gas shells which didn't do much harm, and then messed up our forward zone with his trench mortars. At 7:20 his men began to come on, first little bunches with machine guns, and then the infantry in waves. It was clear they were fresh troops, and we learned afterwards from prisoners that they were Bavarians, 6th or 7th, I forget which, but the division that hung us up at Monchy. At the same time there was the sound of a tremendous bombardment across the river. It looked as if the main battle had swung from Albert and Montdidier to a direct push for Amiens. I have often tried to write down the events of that day. I tried it in my report to the Corps. I tried it in my own diary. I tried it because Mary wanted it, but I have never been able to make any story that hung together. Perhaps I was too tired for my mind to retain clear impressions, though at the time I was not conscious of special fatigue. More likely it is because the fight itself was so confused, for nothing happened according to the books, and the orderly soul of the Boche must have been scarified. At first it went as I expected. The outpost line was pushed in, but the fire from the redoubts broke up the advance and enabled the line of resistance in the forward zone to give a good account of itself. There was a check and then another big wave, assisted by a barrage from field guns brought far forward. This time the line of resistance gave at several points, and Lefroy flung in the Americans in a counter-attack. That was a mighty performance. The engineers, yelling like dervishes, went at it with a bayonet, and those that preferred swung their rifles as clubs. It was terribly costly fighting and all wrong, but it succeeded. They cleared the Boche out of a ruined farm he had rushed and a little wood, and we established our front. Blenkiron, who saw it all, for he went with them and got the tip of an ear picked off by a machine-gun bullet, hadn't any words wherewith to speak of it. "And I once said those boys looked puffy," he moaned. The next phase, which came about midday, was the tanks. I had never seen the German variety, but had heard that it was speedier and heavier than ours, but unwieldy. We did not see much of their speed, but we found out all about their clumsiness. Had the things been properly handled, they should have gone through us like rotten wood. But the whole outfit was bungled. It looked good enough country for the use of them, but the men who made our positions had had an eye to this possibility. The great monsters, mounting a field gun besides other contrivances, wanted something like a high road to be happy in. They were useless over anything like difficult ground. The ones that came down the main road got on well enough at the start, but Blenkiron very sensibly had mined the highway, and we blew a hole like a diamond pit. One lay helpless at the foot of it, and we took the crew prisoner. Another stuck its nose over and remained there till our field guns got the range and knocked it silly. As for the rest, there is a marshy lagoon called the Pat d'Oie beside the farm of Gavrelle, which runs all the way north to the river, though in most places it only seems like a soft patch in the meadows. This the tanks had to cross to reach our line, and they never made it. Most got bogged and made pretty targets for our gunners. One or two returned, and one, the Americans, creeping forward under cover of a little stream, blew up with the time fuse. By the middle of the afternoon I was feeling happier. I knew the big attack was still to come, but I had my forward zone intact, and I hoped for the best. I remember I was talking to Wake, who had been going between the two zones, when I got the first warning of a new and unexpected peril. A dud shell plumped down a few yards from me. "Those fools across the river are firing short and badly off the straight," I said. Wake examined the shell. "No, it's a German one," he said. Then came others, and there could be no mistake about the direction, followed by a burst of machine-gun fire from the same quarter. We ran in cover to a point from which we could see the north bank of the river, and I got my glass on it. There was a lift of land from behind which the fire was coming. We looked at each other, and the same conviction stood in both faces. The Boche had pushed down the northern bank, and we were no longer in line with our neighbours. The enemy was in a situation to catch us with his fire on our flank and left rear. We couldn't retire to conform, for to retire meant giving up our prepared position. It was the last straw to all our anxieties, and for a moment I was at the end of my wits. I turned to Wake, and his calm eyes pulled me together. "If they can't retake that ground, we're fairly carted," I said. "We are. Therefore they must retake it." "I must get on to Mitchinson." But as I spoke I realised the futility of a telephone message to a man who was pretty hard up against it himself. Only an urgent appeal could effect anything. I must go myself. No, that was impossible. I must send Lefroy, but he couldn't be spared. And all my staff officers were up to their necks in the battle. Besides, none of them knew the position as I knew it. And how to get there? It was a long way round by the bridge at Loisy. Suddenly I was aware of Wake's voice. "You had better send me," he was saying. "There's only one way, to swim the river a little lower down." "That's too damnably dangerous. I won't send any man to certain death." "But I volunteer," he said. "That, I believe, is always allowed in war." "But you'll be killed before you can cross." "Send a man with me to watch. If I get over, you may be sure I'll get to General Mitchinson. If not, send somebody else by Loisy. There's desperate need for hurry, and you see yourself it's the only way." The time was past for argument. I scribbled a line to Mitchinson as his credentials. No more was needed, for Wake knew the possession as well as I did. I sent an orderly to accompany him to his starting place on the bank. "Good-bye," he said, as we shook hands. "You'll see. I'll come back all right." His face, I remember, looked singularly happy. 5 minutes later the Boche guns opened for the final attack. I believe I kept a cool head. At least so Lefroy and the others reported. They said I went about all afternoon grinning as if I liked it, and that I never raised my voice once. It's rather a fault of mine that I bellow in a scrap. But I know I was feeling anything but calm, for the problem was ghastly. It all depended on Wake and Mitchinson. The flanking fire was so bad that I had to give up the left of the forward zone, which caught it fairly, and retire the men there to the battle zone. The latter was better protected, for between it and the river was a small wood, and the bank rose into a bluff which sloped inwards towards us. This withdrawal meant a switch, and a switch isn't a pretty thing when it has to be improvised in the middle of a battle. The Boche had counted on that flanking fire. His plan was to break our two wings, the old Boche plan which crops up in every fight. He left our centre at first pretty well alone, and thrust along the river bank and to the wood of La Bruyère, where we linked up with the division on our right. Lefroy was in the first area and Masterton in the second, and for 3 hours it was as desperate a business as I have ever faced. The improvised switch went, and more of the forward zone disappeared. It was a hot, clear spring afternoon, and in the open fighting the enemy came on like troops at manoeuvres. On the left they got into the battle zone, and I can see yet Lefroy's great figure leading a counter-attack in person, his face all puddled with blood from a scalp wound. I would have given my soul to be in two places at once, but I had to risk our left and keep close to Masterton, who needed me most. The wood of La Bruyère was the maddest sight. Again and again the Boche was almost through it. You never knew where he was, and most of the fighting there was duels between machine-gun parties. Some of the enemy got around behind us, and only a fine performance of a company of Cheshires saved a complete breakthrough. As for Lefroy, I don't know how he stuck it out, and he doesn't know himself, for he was galled all the time by that accursed flanking fire. I got a note about 4:30 saying that Wake had crossed the river, but it was some weary hours after that before the fire slackened. I tore back and forward between my wings, and every time I went north I expected to find that Lefroy had broken. But by some miracle he held. The Boche were in his battle zone time and time again, but he always flung them out. I have a recollection of Blenkiron, stark mad, encouraging his Americans with strange tongues. Once as I passed him I saw that he had his left arm tied up. His blackened face grinned at me. "This bit of landscape's mighty unsafe for democracy," he croaked. "For the love of Mike, get your guns onto those devils across the river. They're plaguing my boys too bad." It was about 7 o'clock, I think, when the flanking fire slacked off, but it was not because of our divisional guns. There was a short and very furious burst of artillery fire on the north bank, and I knew it was British. Then things began to happen. One of our planes, they had been marvellous all day, swinging down like hawks for machine-gun bouts with the Boche infantry, reported that Mitchinson was attacking hard and getting on well. That eased my mind, and I started off for Masterton, who was in greater straits than ever, for the enemy seemed to be weakening on the river bank and putting his main strength in against our right. But my GSO-2 stopped me on the road. "Wake," he said, "he wants to see you." "Not now," I cried. "He can't live many minutes." I turned and followed him to the ruinous cowshed, which was my divisional headquarters. Wake, as I heard later, had swum the river opposite to Mitchinson's right and reached the other shore safely, though the current was whipped with bullets. But he had scarcely landed before he was badly hit by shrapnel in the groin. Walking at first with support and then carried on a stretcher, he managed to struggle on to the divisional headquarters, where he gave my message and explained the situation. He would not let his wound be looked to till his job was done. Mitchinson told me afterwards that with a face grey from pain he drew for him a sketch of our position and told him exactly how near we were to our end. After that he asked to be sent back to me, and they got him down to Loisy in a crowded ambulance, and then up to us in a returning empty. The M.O. who looked at his wound saw that the thing was hopeless, and did not expect him to live beyond Loisy. He was bleeding internally, and no surgeon on earth could have saved him. When he reached us he was almost pulseless, but he recovered for a moment and asked for me. I found him, with blue lips and a face drained of blood, lying on my camp bed. His voice was very small and far away. "How goes it?" he asked. "Please God, we'll pull through, thanks to you, old man." "Good," he said, and his eyes shut. He opened them again. "Funny thing, life. A year ago I was preaching peace. I'm still preaching it. I'm not sorry." I held his hand till 2 minutes later he died. In the press of a fight one scarcely realizes death, even the death of a friend. It was up to me to make good my assurance to Wake, and presently I was off to Masterton. There, in that shambles of La Bruyere, while the light faded, there was a desperate and most bloody struggle. It was the last lap of the contest. 12 hours now, I kept telling myself, and the French will be here and will have done our task. Alas, how many of us would go back to rest? Hardly able to totter, our counter-attacking companies went in again. They had gone far beyond the limits of mortal endurance, but the human spirit can defy all natural laws. The balance trembled, hung, and then dropped the right way. The enemy impetus weakened, stopped, and the ebb began. I wanted to complete the job. Our artillery put up a sharp barrage, and the little I had left comparatively fresh I sent in for a counterstroke. Most of the men were untrained, but there was that in our ranks which dispensed with training, and we had caught the enemy at the moment of lowest vitality. We pushed him out of La Bruyere, we pushed him back to our old forward zone, we pushed him out of that zone to the position from which he had begun the day. But there was no rest for the weary. We had lost at least a third of our strength, and we had to man the same long line. We consolidated it as best we could, started to replace the wiring that had been destroyed, found touch with the division on our right, and established outposts. Then after a conference with my brigadiers I went back to my headquarters, too tired to feel either satisfaction or anxiety. In 8 hours the French would be here. The words made a kind of litany in my ears. In the cowshed where Wake had lain, 2 figures awaited me. The talc-enclosed candle revealed Hamilton and Amos, dirty beyond words, smoke-blackened, blood-stained, and intricately bandaged. They stood stiffly to attention. "Sir, the prisoner," said Hamilton. "I have to report that the prisoner is dead." I stared at them, for I had forgotten Ivery. He seemed a creature of a world that had passed away. "Sir, it was like this. Ever since this morning the prisoner seemed to wake up. Ye'll mind that he was in a kind of a dream all week. But he got some new notions in his head, and when the battle began he exhibited signs of restlessness. Whilst he would lie down in the trench, and whilst he was wanted back to the dugout. According to instructions I provided him with a rifle, but he didn't seem to ken how to handle it. It was your orders, sir, that he was to have means to defend himself if the enemy came on, so Amos gived him a trench knife. But very soon he looked as if he was ettlin' to cut his throat, so I deprived him of it." Hamilton stopped for breath. He spoke as if he were reciting a lesson, with no stops between the sentences. "I jaloused, sir, that he wouldna last oot the day, and Amos here was of the same opinion. The end came at 20 minutes past 3. I ken the time, for I had just compared my watch with Amos. You'll mind that the Germans were beginning a big attack. We were in the front trench of what they call the battle zone, and Amos and me was keeping our eyes on the enemy, who could be observed dribbling over the open. Just then the prisoner catches sight of the enemy and jumps up on top. Amos tried to hold him, but he kicked him in the face. The next we kenned he was running very fast towards the enemy, holding his hands over his head and crying out loud in a foreign language." "It was German," said the scholarly Amos through his broken teeth. "It was German," continued Hamilton. "It seemed as if he was appealing to the enemy to help him. But they paid no attention, and he came under fire of their machine guns. We watched him spin round like a teetotum, and kenned that he was by with it." "You are sure he was killed?" I asked. Yes, sir, when we counter-attacked we found his body. There is a grave close by the farm of Gavrelle, and a wooden cross at its head bears the name of the Graf von Schwabing and the date of his death. The Germans took Gavrelle a little later. I am glad to think that they read that inscription.
This audiobook is brought to you by Full Audiobooks. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon if you love audiobooks.
Chapter